How many are like super excited to be gathering again like this? Yeah, it's been a couple of years, and I got here early this morning, and just having the exhibitors start setting up, you just kind of a little murmur, and then as it was growing, as people were kind of coming in, and you saw some familiar faces, some not so familiar faces, you saw people talking. It's just so exciting to be a part of this. So what a privilege it is to do this. I'm going to ask us, let's just join our hearts in prayer before we open this session, and then I will introduce our speakers here this morning. Our gracious Father, we thank you for this opportunity that we have to be challenged, to educate our children. And I just pray that as we go through this journey on this day and on this weekend in preparation, that our minds, our hearts would truly receive the good seed, and it would bear fruit for generations to come. We commit this day, and we commit this time, and we commit this conference to you in your precious name. Amen. All right, it is my pleasure to introduce Roger and Jan Smith. Dr. Roger and Jan Smith hail from Louisiana, where he is a medical doctor, and Jan manages their horse farm and businesses. All four of their adult children were homeschooled until the college years, and home education has been an exciting journey for them, where they became experts in home and family management, in leadership and community service. They continue to serve in their church and community as mentors and teachers, as well as serving on the board of their state homeschool organization and the board of the National Alliance of Christian Home Education Leaders. Dr. Smith produces a weekly video blog on parenting. So this morning's session is called Transitioning from Controlling to Influencing Your Children. So would you please offer a warm welcome for Roger and Jan Smith.
Well, we are honored to be with you all, and as folks come in, if you would like to sit closer, we encourage that. We usually don't bite, and though sometimes we may spit when we get a little excited. So we've had the pleasure of getting to know a lot of your Canadian leadership through the National Leaders Training and Conference, and we do idea sharing, and we are quite impressed with how they have put this together, and it looks so professional, and they're delivering a great product. So
some of you may be wondering why we are talking about parenting when it's a homeschool conference, that we need to get on with it. But I'm telling you that day in and day out, when you are homeschooling your children, 9/10 of it is about parenting. And so you got to get that right first before you can go on to doing some of the academics. And we feel like that your commitment to homeschooling is one of the most important decisions that you and your family will ever make. It's one of the hardest, best things you could possibly do for your children. But getting the parenting part right is the very first thing that has to happen outside of your marriage. So the marriage part has to be a part. So that's important, and Joe and Zan are going to be teaching about that, and that's woven into all of our teaching as well. How many of you are this is your first time at a conference? Okay, all right. So with Roger and I, over the years when we started homeschooling, we didn't know anybody else that was homeschooling in our whole area. So going to a conference was the way we got equipped, and the way we got a vision for what God could do through homeschooling our children. Most of the parenting training that we got was at a homeschool conference just like this. So I commend you for making the effort. I'm thrilled with the number of men that I see in the audience as well, because it's a commitment for both of you together of how you're going to raise your children. And the church, sadly, is not doing a very effective job of equipping parents to do the job of parenting. So we hope today that you will leave highly encouraged and with a whole lot of new ideas of how to implement into the homes that you have.
So we start with a short video. It's actually the foundation for this talk is a book that we have that's coming out the first of the month, next month, and it's at the printers right now. And so from moving from control to influence. Let's see. How many of you have adult children? Okay. Oh, there's a good number. Okay, so I would say that probably 10 to 20% in here have some adult children. Probably not all of them are adults, but all of ours are adults. And so in the journey through parenting, things change. And so those of you who have adult children, do you wake up in the morning trying to control what it is that they're doing in their life, wherever they are, at their job, in their household if they have children? And so we don't seek to control our adult children. In fact, we want them to have what's known as self-control. And so we do start on the other end of the spectrum of having control, and in fact, it's our responsibility to train and control those aspects in the early years. But somewhere along the way, we began to transfer control from us to them. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so whenever we no longer controlling, there's a different aspect of the relationship that is so important that we must have with our adult children, and it is something that we develop through the years. And that type of relationship, we're going to use the key word influence. Influence. Can we have an influential relationship with our adult children? In fact, we must. It's so important that as you move through the parenting years that you're going to develop influence and lessen control. And that's what we're going to talk about, is what that looks like as we journey through the path of parenting. And we can skip this if that's... Okay, I'll just go ahead and advance to the next thing. And we'll play that later at another time. So, moving from control to influence. So somewhere along the path, this is our bunch. And so this was a few years back before any of them had children. And so we have 3 sons, and they have wives. So those are the 3 ladies with them. And then our daughter, who is the number 2 child. We have a boy, girl, boy, boy. And the girl is by me on the far left. And so we have, she is still single. She has a business of her own. She's a fashion designer. The son that's next to Jan, he works for Charles Schwab, an investment company. He works in a communications role in the office, managing their product communication. The next son is an electrical engineer in Houston, Texas. And then the son on the right is a salesman. He is our master relationship guy and communicator, and he was our troubled child. Anybody got one of those? We thought we were great parents on our first 2. Everything was going so well, and we were doing such a great job, and we were so amazing, and then came Rodney. And so he's the one who taught us most about parenting. And so a lot of the stories we'll use in our other discussions will center around Rodney, because he is the most, we'll just say he added spice to our life. And we fortunately have Rodney in our life. He is very dear to us today. And we'll talk about some of those journeys. So
He has 3 little girls, and the one that's standing next to me, he and his wife have 3 little boys. And they, much to all of our surprise, they married later in life, and they are very happily married, thankfully, but it did not happen as soon or as early as they had originally thought. So they're just now 6 and under.
So, moving from control to influence for effective parenting. So this is the foundation graph that we're going to talk about, and this is just to give you a visual picture of the concepts that we'll be talking about. And I don't think that the pointer does anything, but as you can see along the bottom, we're going to be talking about how things change from birth on the left side to adulthood. And you'll notice that there are no actually ages, time stamps or marks on there, because did all of your children walk at the same age? Or talk at the same age? Or read at the same time? Children develop on their own path. So we'll talk about in general principles what is happening in our relationship with our children over time. And so there's not an exact mark that this happens at age 7, but in generally that ballpark will, in those years, we'll talk about some of the concepts of things that happen. But there is a progression from left to right, from birth to adulthood. And we start out at birth with as close to 100% control as we'll ever get. But as time marks forward, whether we like it or not, we're losing control. In fact, as I started out, in adulthood, we don't want to be controlling them. We want them to have self-control. And so the whole concept is that as we're moving forward, control is decreasing. And get this, that's normal. It's normal for you to feel like you're losing control because you are. And so we want to talk about how we respond to that with the other graph, where we start out with essentially no influence. We cannot, we cannot talk to our infant, our newborn, and convince them that they need to stop crying, or that it's time to go to sleep. It's not a talking, influencing kind of relationship at that point. So we're controlling lots of things. We're controlling all their decisions, what they eat, what brand of diapers they wear, where they go. We take them everywhere. And yet, at that same time, we begin the journey of developing influence that we must depend on as time goes on.
What we really want is to pattern our parenting relationship with our children after the way God treats us. And, when they asked Jesus about the commandments, he summed them up in 2. And what was that? That we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we're to love our neighbor as ourselves. He saw things as pretty simple. When we do those things and our heart is desirous of pleasing the Father, then we would be like Joseph when he was tempted and he said, how can I do this thing and sin against my God? It was based on a relationship with God and an understanding that we are to be honoring and pleasing to God our Father. That's what we're talking about. That's the essence. The freedom that we have in Christ, as opposed to the way man tends to do it, where they add laws upon laws upon laws. And when that happens, things get way out of whack and kind of weird. And so in our parenting, we need to be careful that as our children get older, that instead of us squeezing tighter and tighter and trying to hold on to these kids, and they're going to pull harder and harder away from us. We want to be able to have taught them the principles, to have established the relationship of being pleasing and honoring and being able to be pleased by their behavior, to have a type of relationship that we can take delight in our children so that then they can come close because we're not hanging on so tightly to them. Do you see what I'm saying? God gives us freedom in Him, not to sin, but to be who we are in Christ, to be strong, to have a relationship base in our honoring and our pleasing to God the Father. That's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about no rules, just like grace is not a license to sin. But it is the freedom, the forgiveness, the complete acceptance that we have before the Father, that He says, nothing can take you out of my hand. That we are so secure in who we are in relation to God and to what Christ has done for us, that we have freedom to love others, to accept others when they're not at the same place that we are, that we can be mature enough to be accepting. That's what we're talking about in terms of a relationship with your children, that they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that nothing that they are going to do or say is going to keep you from loving them. Now, that's a little harder when they're 13 and they're being a little unlovable. But it's rooted in who you are as their parent. It's really true, even when you're aggravated with them. They need to know that you not only love them, but that you like them.
So one of my favorite parenting authors is Dr. Ross Campbell, and he opens his first book that really became a bestseller around the world. That is titled "How to Really Love Your Child," and he starts the book. He says, there's not a problem with parents loving their children. The problem is that children do not feel loved. And then he goes on to talk about the relationship. And so a lot of the principles that he talks about in his book, we've incorporated into our teaching and in our principles and the way that we lived with our children. And so we do want our children to feel that love, that they are actually drawn to us rather than trying to, get away from us. So
those first 5 years, as hard as they are, if you've got little ones, my heart goes out to you. I mentor a group of moms on Tuesday mornings, and then on Sunday mornings I have another group that I do a similar activity with, and once a month we have young couples in our home. We just recently had 22 for our May time, and so I know moms with little ones. Even though it's been a long time since mine were little, I know how hard that is. But I'm here to tell you from a medical view, from a psychological, that those first 5 years, everybody agrees in how important it is what you were doing in the life of those children. In fact, if it's not done early on in those first 5 years, sometimes you can't go back and do it. The whole idea of forming an attachment and a bond to someone, a loving, secure bond, if that's not formed, it's a dangerous place for a child to be the rest of their life. So sometimes the things that you're doing with those first 5 years, even in the first 2 years, you think anybody could feed the baby or burp the baby or put the baby down. But no, they need you. They need you as the parents, the people that they have heard from in the womb. That attachment, that knowing that their need is going to be met by someone who cares and loves them. As Homo sapiens, we have by far the longest time frame of dependence of a child on the parent than any other creature. They are dependent on us for a long time, and God created it that way for a reason. And so the work and the value of those first 5 years are important. The training to bring up your children in the training and admonition of the Lord, or the discipline and instruction, a lot of different verses, versions of that verse. But the truth is those first 5 years, there's lots of training. In fact, it seems constant.
And it's quite interesting that the security that is developed is, so we look on the graph, that it's rooted in those years that are controlled, which we're laying down the law and we're teaching them what we mean by different instructions, and so we spring from that period of where we have lots of control, but it lays the foundation for a richer and broader relationship that we'll talk about. So this is kind of the preteen, maybe adolescent, early teen years, where there's what I call the free fall of loss of control. Does anybody feel like they're in that right now? It seems like the children they're questioning everything that you do. They want to have an explanation of why we have to do it this way. Every turn, every issue, even just getting in the car. Why do I have to sit in this seat? Every issue seems to be that they are trying to take control. They are. And so we want to talk about some ways of managing that transfer of control, because it is necessary that it happen. And though it seems to be painful and it sometimes is frightening, it's normal. And it's healthy. And we want to look at it in a way that maybe you can manage that in an even healthier way.
So keeping that long-term perspective that we want them to transfer their control from us to themselves and ultimately to be under Christ and His control and His authority, His rule, that transitioning of starting even as early as 9 months when you're changing those diapers, that those first 5 years establishing that control and that authority, a yieldedness of spirit to you. Some people in today's society say you really start training about 5. We say the hardest part of your job is done at 5. You know, and that the mistake we make is not starting early enough in training. I'm a gardener, and when you pull a weed when it's little, it's a lot easier than wait until it's big and established and that root is down in there and you're struggling to pull something you could have plucked easily when it was little. That's what I'm talking about. Those elementary years when you start to get a little breather, you know how they suddenly reach a place between 3.5 to 5 where you start to be able to breathe a little bit? And we're going to be talking about discipline more later. But in those elementary years, that's where you start teaching and training not just how to behave, but how to do skills. Let them do things before you think they're really ready to do it. Like a 4-year-old that wants to vacuum is all about it, but a 14-year-old, Teach them when they're younger than you think that they're capable of doing it, and later they'll be competent and able to do so many things. So those elementary years, you teach them, and then when they hit that junior high and high school years, it's not that you stop having rules in the home. No, you're going to still have them get up and be a part of your family devotions, whatever your routine is. That doesn't change per se, but that you begin to give them more choices in all the extra things that start to happen, the multitude of decisions that have to be made every week about whether they go to a movie or not. You know, in elementary, you're still making all those choices. But as they get older, you start to let that rope out more and more and more so that you begin to train their thinking and not just dictate to them what they can and can't do. So we're not saying take away all, rules and let them play video games all the time. That's not what we're saying. So please don't misunderstand that when you give a phone or when you give a Facebook or Instagram or whatever it is that you may or may not allow them to do, have them participate in those choices, and you still are going to have some overarching rules of the home, but then there are a lot of other choices, what sport they play that year, what activities they participate in, that is going to be a decision that you make together as a family, where you're yielding the training of those choices more and more and more to your children. Even what they're going to study in school, they need to be a part of that in helping to determine the direction that they really want to go.
So as we are seeking to move from control, which we work under in the early years, and we transition in our minds and in our relationship or our management style to more of an influential relationship, it is a gradual process. So we want to talk about some of the different stages and what that looks like and what, it is that free fall time that scares us. So I've put some general sections or time periods here, and we will look at them and exactly what's kind of happening in the children and how we need to see what's going on inside them. And it may guide you in your decision making as to how you manage. So in those early years, in the what we would call the control years, in the first 5 years where you're really focusing on rules. They're learning language. They're learning skills. They're learning how to do stuff, and they're learning what you mean by what language you use. And so there's lots and lots of, you control them, but they are picking up what the language actually means. When you say, get in the car. When you say, get in your car seat, let's buckle up. And they develop those habits of what is under control. And usually in this time period, the rules are not very flexible, but even as we progress, as you start giving them some more choices, maybe they have 2 cups that they can choose from. They have the green cup and the red cup. They have a choice, and we're giving them a choice to learn to make choices, because as we go through life, do we make choices? Well, naturally, yes. And so, but do we want them to have pull open the drawer of their clothes, and they choose from the total pile of clothes as to what they want to wear, and they pull out every item? Well, that would be disastrous. But in the early stages, we limit their choices because we're training them to know the skills of choosing, the language of choosing. And so we would limit choices, but as you can imagine, the options that are offered in choice as we go along are much more broad and much more sophisticated. But in those early years, the language and skill years, then they're much more limited. So be careful if you have little ones that you're not giving them choices that they cannot manage. But as they're gaining the skill of making choices, offer them the opportunity to use that decision-making skill. And they will also be learning to manage their disappointment when someone else has chosen the blue cup and they wanted it, and there's only one choice left. And anybody had the temper tantrum child that says, I wanted this cup? And we've all had that.
Whichever cup they didn't choose, that's when they want that other cup. Let's take the concept of the clothing, and let me give you an example from our family. That we had a daughter, the one girl, and she had a very definite sense of style from the time she was very young. And her favorite thing to do when we were reading aloud was to cut with paper scissors. And so, needless to say, she is now a designer in leather clothing and leather purses and bags, and it's just really amazing to see what God did from the beginning, that He had put that in her heart, the capacity to do some of the things that she's now doing. But we would have to choose a lot of times in those early years, because she was happy. She had 2 or 3 favorite outfits, and she would have worn those every day, all year. And so I would just give her one of those favorite outfits along with another outfit. And as she got older, we realized how important it was for her to have some say in that clothing. But when we hit that junior high age group, then we established what we called the style show. And she would know that she could choose, and it took some of the fight off of me. And so when we were in a store, if she wanted something, that as long as I could exchange to return it, and I don't like to return things, but I had to make a choice to be willing to do that, to give her some autonomy. But she knew that if she chose something that was questionable, that nothing was a final decision, and she did until she did the style show for Dad. And when we would go home, she would do the style show and come down the stairs, and Roger would say, or that looks really nice on you, And so then, based on Dad's yes or no, and he would always explain to her what he was thinking or why he was thinking. And sometimes it was a surprise to me. I remember this one zipper dress that I thought was so cute, and he said, absolutely not. So, it just let Dad take some of that pressure off if it's a hard situation like that. So we would take back what was next. And then later in high school, she became the state fashion coordinator in 4-H. That's a organization that we have. And she got to work under the LSU person who was over their fashion design department in LSU as a teenager because LSU was the sponsor of 4-H. And so she ran this teen fashion camp with her group of teenager girls, and it was the most amazing thing to hear her in their little style show, that girls that chose what they wanted to wear. They were given a particular event and they got to shop and make a selection of what they were going to wear. And then as they were coming out in their selections, to hear my, 17-year-old teaching the 13-year-old,
Wow, that's not a good choice.
and hearing words come out of her mouth that she had heard her father say, or to hear me say, that really as a woman you want to accentuate your femininity, not your sexuality. And honey, that's a little sexy. So she just was able to really, that's the spectrum that we want, is to train them and teach them along the way so that when they are older, then they not only know, but they can help others to learn.
So I didn't plan to address this, and I'm glad you brought that up about the style show. We determined that there were a limited number of days that we wanted to have fights in our house. We didn't want to fight over clothes every day. And for you, it may be a different issue. But for our daughter, clothes was an issue. And so we developed this concept of we're going to have a style show. Jan and Emily saw clothes from a woman's point of view. And whenever I would see something on they thought was incredibly cute, I'd go, that's incredibly dangerous. Because I could look at it and see what boys would see. I would see what the other men would see. And I would say, and then I had an opportunity to say, this may not make sense to you at all, Emily, but this is what I see. This is what that zipper going down the front causes my eye to look at. Is that what you want? And she then gradually, through the years, got over her disappointment and could begin to listen to the logic. In the early years, it was just, no, take that off. But gradually we moved from the absolute control to where we chose for them what they would wear, but we then began to move through that influence where we groomed their thinking and decision making and helped them to understand the decisions that they were making and to where they can make them totally independent of us. There's a description of the parenting process. And the first time I heard this, I was in college before I was married at the time, but we had no children. And this course on child development, the professor said, parenting is the process of eliminating your child's need of you. It's rather shocking to think of it in those terms. It is the process of eliminating your child's need of you. Now, it doesn't mean that it's cutting off the relationship, but it's making it where they are able to manage their lives, because one day you will not be there. Because we want to move them from dependence to independence, and this is that process of transferring control to them and developing influence.
I wanted to give you one other example of how each child is going to have their own unique self. They were created by God for good works, that they should walk in them. And so just as you were created in Christ Jesus, so are they. And you don't ever know how that's going to manifest itself. But we had our oldest child, he was a climber. He was a climber from the very beginning. I remember finding him, the first time I heard a thump hit the floor when he was about 15 or 16 months old, and he had jumped out of his baby bed. And he could get that leg up there, and no matter how many times I swatted it, he was going to hit that floor. And so we moved him into a big bed much earlier because it was safer for him to climb out of a twin bed than it was to jump from his baby bed. Later, when we moved to Kentucky, we had this great climbing tree right out the back door. And I knew that he was going to be climbing that thing. And even though he was only 2, that I stood out there and I made sure he was safe and how to get all the way up that tree and then how to place his feet and climb all the way back down. And it wasn't long after we had moved into that little house that I had a neighbor across the street call me, panicked, saying, "Your little boy, I can see him over the top of the house." And I said, "I know, I can see him. I've made sure he knows how to climb down." Okay?
So we were always the crazy parent that was pushing the envelope.
This same little boy, when he was in college, he was the student government president, but all the policemen knew that if they saw something climbing on the top of one of the buildings, they would say, "Caleb, is that you? Get down." Now, why he wanted to be Spider-Man, I don't know, but he did. And then later, where did he meet his wife? At a rock climbing event.
So somehow they come here programmed, and what you see them doing in your living room and in your kitchen, and whatever they're doing, you're going to find that as they progress in life, that's an integral part of who they are. And so sometimes those very aggravating things, just like our daughter cutting paper dolls in the living room and making such a mess, she now makes a living with those same scissors. Well, a different pair of scissors, but the same concept, you got me. Okay, so moving from those control years, you can see that they move to a time period in the elementary years where they're focused on competence. They want to do what you're doing. They want to mow the lawn. They want to wash the car. They want to pump the gas. They want to do everything you're doing. They want to mix the eggs. They are developing skills and competence. And the best time to let them do those things is before they're actually competent to do them. And Jan referred to this earlier, is the fact that if you wait too late, the 14-year-old does not want the vacuum, but the 4-year-old does. 4-year-old is going to do a good job? No. But it's not about perfection. It's about the process of them growing in their competence. And so the very things that they show some interest in, find ways for them to do it safely. You know, naturally, you're not going to handle them the sharpest knife in the house. What you're showing?
I was just showing the purse that she now does with all that. This is one of her purses that she just had for sale at the Jazz Fest in New Orleans.
Yeah. So you need to push the control toward them, because if you're always fighting over control, you're going to always be fighting. And so whenever they show an interest in something, find a way to get them involved in it. So if it's loading the dishwasher or doing the laundry or whatever it is they show an interest in, they're usually going to be interested when they're not able to do it well. But that's the very time to begin to allow them to gain some control in their area, and you can actually encourage the transfer of control, because that's whenever the relationship's going to be healthy, is whenever you're actually giving them control before they even ask for it.
It was in that junior high time frame that Roger came up with something that I thought worked beautifully in our home to keep from nagging and about picking up things. And oh my goodness, we were showing horses and we had tack galore. And it starts to get busy and hectic when they get involved in more activities when they get older. And one of the problems with picking up is that they had been trained how to hang things up correctly, and they had been encouraged to do that. But in junior high, instead of just having a heavy-handed approach, Roger came up with this particular bag that he would carry around in the evenings after he got, everybody got settled into their rooms, and he would walk around and just pick up whatever had not gotten picked up by the kids. If it was that favorite pair of jeans that they had to have for the next day, or whatever it was that had gotten left on the floor, went into the bag.
So it was quite annoying to me to go through the house and everything was strewn to kingdom come. And so instead of fighting, I said, we've got to have a peaceful way of training this method, training this issue. And so we created this jail. I think it was a box at one time. It may have been a bag at another time. But the rule was, at any time of the day, I can go to the house, and if something is not in its place, I can put your item in jail. Now, you can redeem that item by doing something that we really need done, but no one that wants to do. We had all this leather, saddles and bridles and bootstraps and all kinds of things that needed to be conditioned. And so we said, okay, you can redeem your things that you have been irresponsible with. Okay, so because we were training responsibility. It wasn't so much about the things on the floor. It was about them managing their life to manage those things on the floor. And so we said, we can put this in jail, but you can redeem it. Does that sound like this is a biblical concept? So we said, you can redeem this by conditioning a piece of leather. One piece of leather, one item. You get to choose what you want to redeem. If you don't want to redeem it, it is lost forever. Or it just stays in jail. And so we taught them the concept of redemption. And you know what it kept us from doing? Stomping through the house, angrily shouting, "You've got to clean up. You've got to pick up this mess." And it kept us from ruining the relationship. We let them be in charge of redeeming their items, and little by little, they became more and more aware of where they dropped their shoes and their boots and their hats and their gloves and their books and whatever. Little by little, they began to manage those things because they got tired of conditioning the leather. Now, even in that, we made it as pleasant as possible. We said, okay, we did a lot of reading aloud in the evenings. So whether we were reading a book aloud or whether we were watching some type of program or a movie or something together as a family, we said, during that time, you can condition the leather while you're listening to the book. And so it wasn't so painful, but in the process, the pleasant process of redemption, it helped them to associate a bad activity, that it had a cost, that they could manage the cost, and they learned the concept of redeeming an item. And we want them to have a mindset of redemption in life, of redeeming other things that are in a bad spot.
Do you remember the phase when they were entering that toddlerhood, and yet they weren't quite big enough to do what they wanted to do, like open the refrigerator or something? That old attitude of me do it myself, or maybe the current attitude that you're dealing with, me do it myself. And then they would fall on the floor. If you helped them after trying several times, you open the refrigerator and they wanted to do it and they couldn't do it. That's kind of how they get in junior high. They want to do things themselves that they're not quite able to do. And so therefore, there's some angst that's going on in that time period. And we want to make that as smooth a transition as possible. And it's just a difficult thing because sometimes as they're trying to think like an adult and their brain is being rewired, and this delightful child that you've had for the last 10 years suddenly becomes just weird and up and down emotionally, and you're just like, what is going on? There's nothing you can say, or they come up with these outlandish things. Well, when our Rodney was going through that phase, I was trying to help him understand the way he would ask me or tell me something, and that what was respectful and what was disrespectful.
Is respect a value in your family? It was in ours, and it probably is in most of yours. We want to be respectful. We definitely want them to be respectful of us, right? But really, it's a two-way street, okay? So go ahead.
So I was mopping, and it was the rodeo weekend. Now, a rodeo weekend in our little bitty town was a big deal. All their friends were going, and we're going to go, probably have friends over afterwards. And so I was trying to get ready, and I was mopping, and Rodney, my 13-year-old pimple-faced guy, was trying to talk with me about something that he wanted, and I looked up and I said, "Rodney, that's disrespectful." And he kept on, and I said, "You're being disrespectful." And he kept on, and finally, I didn't know, I know, this was bad attitude. I don't know if you've ever lost it, but I picked up the bucket that I had there with my mop water, and I just went whoosh. I said, now clean it up and don't be disrespectful. Bad attitude. But I went to my room and I said, Lord, you've got to help me get through to this kid. I don't know how to help him understand what I'm saying, that he's not meaning to be disrespectful, but the tone and the attitude that he's coming across is disrespectful. So we go to the rodeo. I have 3 sisters, and we all were together with all of our kids about the same age. And as we were all leaving, I came out just in time to see this 13-year-old son being handcuffed and put in the back of a cop car. He was just with me, picking up trash as we were leaving like a good Boy Scout. And I see him being put in the back of a cop car. And I would go up and I say, excuse me, is there a problem? He said, yes, ma'am, there is. And I said, could you explain to me what's going on? And he said, he was being disrespectful.
So in the process of redeeming our son, we were able to have a conversation where he was able to hear us. That we talked about sometimes the things that you are saying, it seems normal to you, but you have to consider the listener. And in the very time where we were at our wits' end trying to relate to this and breaking through to this son, the police helped us. It wasn't planned on our part, but you know, our Heavenly Father is concerned about our children. And He can use things that you don't plan on to get their attention or to get your attention. And in this case, he kind of woke up. And it wasn't that he went to jail, but that he realized that other people were responding in a way that his mother was, and it wasn't just that it was just his mother being a little difficult, is that he was indeed being difficult and disrespectful. And so we were able to navigate through that and and take advantage of that opportunity to help the understanding of respectful communication and relationship.
As they go into those teen years, we call it a specialization time. Now, there's so much that we want to talk to you about.
I want to back up just 1 second and talk about this emotional growth time period. And so that may look like the junior high years, or I forget what terminology you use, grade level, junior high, okay. And so there's a lot of things happening emotionally because hormonal changes are happening. The best resource we know to date for dealing with this or understanding what's happening to your child is a book called No Longer Little. No Longer Little, written by Hal and Melanie Young, and it's well worth whatever it costs. It's not expensive, but it's great. It's a great resource to help you understand what's happening biologically inside, hormonally, what's happening neurologically, what's happening socially, and what's happening to you as the parent during those years, and how you can respond to that. So it's just, the more you understand, the better you can sympathize and have compassion with your child as they are changing, and you can help them to navigate and manage the control that they now have.
As we go into those teenage years, that this whole concept of specialization is important because your children are going to have a certain bent. Now, later this morning, we're going to be doing a session, or today we're going to be doing a session on high school. There's another one tomorrow. Our session is going to be more on how and why you should homeschool. And then tomorrow we'll fill in a lot of the details and some of the specifics, but ours is more of a vision time because we see this critical time as being such an important part of the homeschool journey where that child is really understanding who they are called to be, what it is that lights their fire, what they get excited about, what is their strength. And so you can focus on their strength and not their weakness. Each one of our children had a very different high school experience, in terms of the academics portion of that, because they're in 4 very different types of career paths. And so your goal is to help them understand not just history and science and reading and writing. All of that is important, but not nearly as important as what are they going to do with their life. Do you see what I'm saying? And how we need to help them to begin to think through these things and these decisions and to be a part of that. So working on their strengths and not their weaknesses.
During the specialization time, you will see, just like you experienced today, there are things that are easy for you, and there are things that are very difficult for you. Does anybody relate to that? Things that you're not good at, these other things. So you don't do them. You hire people to do those. All right? So whereas we operate in our strengths, and we need to recognize that as our child is emerging to adulthood, that their strengths will become more apparent, and those are the things where we need to focus their education and training on. Not that we ignore the weaknesses, but we don't focus on the weaknesses, because they're going to be their lifelong weaknesses, just like your weaknesses are lifelong. And so you accommodate weaknesses, you grow the strengths. And that's the specialization years. And that's where you can really transfer control more and more to them, because they are getting better and better and better at it. And so as we zoom out, we can see that the specialization is in the time when we have the least amount of control. They're taking control, they're taking flight, and they are becoming the person that they were designed to be. And we'll talk about that more in the high school years, and so actually what that looks like and how you can facilitate that specialization. But the whole concept is we are moving from control to influence. You hear of teenage rebellion, and you hear of conflicts between parent and child, and sometimes it actually gets even violent. All right, just like the young man in Texas that went in and shot his grandmother in the face and then went to the school to shoot up the school. That was in the news this week. Okay, so it can become violent, but it also can just be a turbulent time. But our goal is to have the kind of relationship where we are influencing them. And when we are focusing on control and we're bringing down the heavy hand of rules and regulations, we're going to find that we have more and more fights and more struggles. We want to encourage you that those teenage years can be some of the best years. But the more you focus on the rules, the worse they will be. It is developing that relationship that the rules are the guide and you're the cheerleader. They're struggling with the rules and we're not beating them over the head with it. And so there's a way to do that. We transfer the control and we maintain the relationship to where when they're adults.
From our youngest child that I'd like to tell you about in this regard. He was our happy-go-lucky, the kind that when he was a baby, people used to ask me all the time, is he always this happy? And I would say, pretty much. I guess the Lord knew that he came right under that child and that I had to have some relief. And he was just easy. He was just easy, but because he was so easygoing, he tended to kind of let things slide and not consider them as important as maybe they really were. And when he was in high school, Roger had bought a little laundromat, and we had some rental properties that he did to help our children, our boys, learn how to work, to give them real work experiences. And so when Hudson was mowing our laundromat, our youngest, he was about 15, I guess, and the neighboring business said, well, while you're mowing, just to keep it looking right, why don't you mow ours as well? But he said, I have one stipulation. I want it mowed every single week. Well, Hudson had a tendency to let things slide. And I would remind him, I would say, he said he wanted it mowed every week, Hudson. He said, I'll get to it. Well, two or three times in a row, he kind of would let it slide into the next week. And the dentist who was over that office, he said, Hudson, I want it mowed every week. And guess what happened eventually? He got fired. Now, losing that $20 a week was not monumental, but being fired by somebody he admired and respected was. So even though I had mentioned, I think it's time to mow the yard, Hudson, it wasn't anything off of me. He needed to fail safely. Instead of being fired as an electrical engineer, let him be fired as the mower of this little $20 plot.
So allowing safe failure is great training. We call it the training ground of natural consequences. And so finding ways that your children can fail, and it even came into play whenever our daughter was deciding to develop her leather design business, is that she was working for someone else and she thought she would start the business. And she called me to get advice, and we were in the influence years. She was living in another city, and she called and said, I'm thinking about doing this. And so I began to ask her a series of questions. How much money do you have to get started? Do you know who your potential buyers are? Do you know what your suppliers are? Do you know this? I said, what happens if it goes completely belly up and you lose it all? And she told me what she would do in that situation. I said, well, it sounds like you have a plan. I think you should go for it, but it's your call. That was an influential relationship where she had counted the cost, she had a plan, and that's where we want them to be. Not that we are calling the shots for them, but they have the tools to be able to call their own shots and to make good choices, even if it goes south. But sometimes having a plan to deal with the failure, or sometimes when they do fail, they learn from that. You know, one of our favorite authors on leadership and training is John Maxwell, and he says, if first you succeed, try something harder next time. Because we learn from our failures, we don't learn from getting it right. And so as we seek to move from control to influence, you're not going to do it perfectly. You're going to have failures yourself, where you said the wrong thing, you tried control instead of letting them flap their wings. It's not going to be a perfect job. But if you know where you're going, and you have a picture of the kind of relationship you want with your child in the end, you have a chance to get there. Because what gets pictured gets done. You can move your relationship in that direction, and it's in baby steps. You're not going to jump from complete control to complete influence, but little by little, pass control to your child and empower them and strengthen them and inspire them to control themselves, their thoughts, their actions, their decisions. It's a great journey. And welcome to the parenting journey. You're all on it. So we look forward to interacting with you more as we do other sessions with you. So okay. So let me pray for you, Father. We thank you that you love us and you know our children, and that you have put us together, and that you have a plan for each of our children. Even now, help these parents here to know, to love, and delight in their children in a way that equips them to become the adult that you've designed them to be. Oh, Father, I pray that these homes would be ruled by peace and grace, kindness and love, and that their children would know and feel their love in a way that deepens the relationship day by day through all the ups and downs and struggles and decisions. Give these parents staying power, I pray, in this process. And may we all honor you in our homes. We do pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.